So, back in March, Pope Leo, the current leader of the Roman Catholic Church, invited the investigative journalist and author Gareth Gore to the Vatican to talk to him about his work and research into the very controversial Catholic organization Opus Dei. This meeting was highly publicized. They did not keep the fact that it was happening under wraps. And after the fact, Gareth Gore published a few articles talking about what he specifically told Pope Leo about Opus Dei, gave him a copy of his book, Opus, which you need to read or listen to if you haven't already. Please, I'm begging you. And in one of these articles, there is something specific that Gareth Gore mentioned that I want to draw your attention to, and that we are going to be spending some time focusing on in this video today and in a couple of subsequent videos, because this is something that, in general, I have been aware of for quite some time. I have written about it. I have created video content about it. I have talked to former members and journalists about it. It continues to crop up like a bad penny throughout so many of the stories of people who come out of this organization. And I am of the opinion that if what is being reported is true, it reveals something incredibly telling about the reality of life inside Opus Dei for the members. So this is pretty relevant, pertinent, especially right now, because while Opus Dei has always been a little bit controversial, has always found itself mired in some sort of controversy somewhere at some point, right now it has been very recently accused of really egregious human rights violations, up to and including human trafficking, and it is being investigated in Argentina by federal authorities under those same accusations. So this is something that I think we need to spend some time talking about. And in general, I think we need to be aware of the kinds of practices that are being employed, because, like it or not, this organization and the people in it have found a way to have quite an impact on society, to such an extent that I don't think most people realize that it's there, but it is quite significant. And considering the times that we are living through, I think we need to have a conversation about an organization that seems to be completely unable to grapple with the mental health crisis that members seem to find themselves in. So, if this is the first video of mine that you have clicked on, hi, my name is Bat Griffin, and this is the Deep Dive Project, which is my venture in independent citizen journalism and research. You will notice that there is a banner scrolling across the top of your screen, and that banner is there for a reason. The information that it displays is important, and I need you to note it and note what it says, because it is serious. I am not here to present myself as a wellspring of all truth and knowledge. I am not here to be your one-stop shop for anything. My goal is to challenge you a little bit, maybe, to present information and resources, and to hopefully encourage you to want to learn more, because we live at such a unique time period right now where the answers to the questions that we have are honestly just a few internet queries away, and who knows how much longer that will continue to be the case. So while I am not here to fearmonger or alarm, it is not hyperbole to say that ignorance is a luxury we and billions of innocent people simply can no longer afford. So if you haven't subscribed already, I hope that you will consider doing so and give this video a thumbs up as well, because it really helps a ton with getting this content pushed in the algorithm, and it's totally free and doesn't cost you a dime. I want to issue a quick content warning. I suppose that should be obvious, but still I am going to say it. The topics that we are going to be discussing today are disturbing, may not be appropriate for all audiences, and viewer discretion is advised. Please keep your own mental health in mind at all times. I also want to take a moment and speak specifically to any viewers who are sympathetic to or involved with or are supportive of Opus Dei. I see the comments that you leave. saying that this organization has been such a benefit to you and that you've never experienced anything negative, and nor has anyone that you know. And I want you to know that I am so happy that that is the case. I am so happy to know that you have not suffered the way some people have said that they have. I don't want that for anyone. And I want to challenge you to consider the duality of a positive experience existing within an organization that also negatively impacts people as well. It is very, very possible for there to be a wide range of experiences within any institution or organization, but especially one with a global influence that is in cultures all around the world. Do you really think that your singular experience and the experiences of a small handful of people that you know are actually representative of the whole of experiences that people have in Opus Dei? And add to that, even if the stories of the survivors and the things that they are saying that they experienced represent only a portion of the experiences within Opus Dei, does that invalidate them to you? How much human suffering is acceptable to you? Personally speaking, for myself, the answer is zero. Zero human suffering is acceptable. I don't care what the goal is. That's my conviction. And I understand the challenge that it is to be presented with information that goes so counter to everything that you hold dear, everything that you have believed your own perception of reality. But we must challenge ourselves and step outside of our comfort zones, because that is the only way that anything is ever going to change and improve for everyone. Who are we trying to uplift? All of the children of God, or only the specific ones that look deserving? So the first article that I'm going to pull up and reference here, and you can access these in a source document down below, is one of the articles that Gareth Gore wrote for the National Catholic Reporter. I'm not going to read the entire thing. Some of it's some preamble about how he found out he was invited there and how he got there and meeting the Pope and shaking his hand and posing for photos, and he gave him a copy of his book, like I said. But then he gets into the particulars of what he told Pope Leo, and that is what I want to draw your attention to for today for our purposes. He says, I shared disturbing firsthand accounts shared with me of a psychiatric facility in the north of Spain, known to those inside Opus Dei as La Cuarta Planta, the fourth floor, where members were quietly sent to be treated for the devastating impact that life inside the group has had on their mental well-being. I offered to connect the Vatican with people who have been treated there and former senior members of the organization who were pushed to send people to the facility. I also shared testimonies detailing the widespread use of prescription drugs to conceal mental illness and of members committing suicide. Now, this is something that, like, I've spoken about this in the past, in the very recent past. I have written about this. I have done deep dives into this subject of just what I have dubbed the abuse of psychiatric medicine, or APM, in Opus Dei. I had to come up with an acronym of some sort for it because when I was doing research, weirdly, while the use of psychiatric medicine and psychiatric facilities to control people is not a new concept, the phenomenon doesn't really seem to have a definition. And if there are any sociologists watching this who know more on this, or maybe you know of a term for it, actually, please illuminate us in the comment section, because I would be fascinated to know, because this type of thing has happened throughout recorded history relatively regularly. Actually, it's happening even now, and it doesn't seem to be something that our society has found a way to even identify very well, which is very, very troubling to me. So within the subject of this abuse of psychiatric medicine, alleged abuse of psychiatric medicine in Opus Dei, I must say, I want to direct your attention now to an article that I wrote on the subject. This is first of, I think, a 4 or 5 part series that I did on my Substack that you can access and read now, that dug into all of this, into the testimonies, into the things that people were saying. I think it's really important to illuminate and amplify the stories of people who have been through these experiences, have that firsthand, and hear the things that they have to say. And that's where a lot of my research stems from. And in this case, one of the references that I used was the 2023 institutional ecclesiastical complaint that was filed with the Vatican against Opus Dei, that outlined a wealth of issues that the authors identified within Opus Dei. And the authors were Antonio Moyo Somolinos, who was a former member or is still currently a member. I'm not exactly sure of his status, but he was involved heavily with Opus Dei at one point in time, and now he has done a ton of work talking about all of these different issues. And he was one of the authors of this 20-page document in which they identify psychiatric medicine as used to break the will of those who dare to express any discrepancy regarding the institutional inconsistencies they have observed. In addition to that, another source that I found mentioned that I think indicates that there's something going on here is an Opus Dei internal document called the Vademecum. Now, Opus Dei internal documents are not available to the public. That's why they're called internal documents. I don't have access to them. I can't read them. If you're not a member, you can't read them. I'm not even really sure if all of the members are allowed to read all of these things, because there seems to be sort of a tiered system with how people are allowed to access information and what information you're allowed to read based on where you fall in their hierarchy totem pole thing that they've got going on. But at one point in time, these secret documents were leaked onto the website Opus Libris, and then Opus Dei ended up suing Opus Libris for this. The documents had to be pulled down. It was a whole thing, so you can't find them anymore, but shadows of those documents still exist, and the copy pasted quotes and the narratives that people have written and everything. And that was where I found this little snippet from the Vademecum, in which it stated, apparently, in these cases of depression and exhaustion, one should consult an experienced and prudent doctor. Better if they are a member of the work. It is very important to inform the directors in order to provide effective help to those who need it. Now, on the surface of it, perhaps this just sounds like an organization that is taking an appropriate degree of concern and consideration for its members. But to my eyes and ears, as someone who has been down a very deep rabbit hole with this organization for a number of years, it sounds a lot more sinister to me, and to me seems to hint at this internal system of control, of which psychiatric medicine and psychopharmacology seems to play a pretty significant role. So scrolling down into here, I will begin in this paragraph. In order to begin working through this issue, I am going to start by taking a step back from the personal accounts and stories that initially led me to this subject, and immediately lay out two of my strongest cases for why I think there is a serious abuse within Opus Dei, specifically in regard to psychiatric medicine, including evidence establishing a precedent of this type of abuse within Opus Dei. My goal is not to convince you to see my point of view, but merely to encourage you to consider the implications if, as I suspect, this abuse is not isolated to a few random outliers. Because of the seriousness of these allegations, I want to stress that I am not presenting them lightly or without some type of corroborating evidence, as much evidence as testimonies from people who have been through the organization can provide. We're taking these testimonies, and that's all that we really have, because we don't have access to the inside. We can't see what's going on. We have to go with what is publicly available to us. And when it comes to proving that an organization or group of people are behaving unlawfully, it's hard to do much better than a court case with multiple convictions and fines. So before you write this off as an insane conspiracy theory, I want to take you through a 2016 French court case that played out between a former domestic worker named Catherine Tissier, along with 99 unnamed others, and the hierarchy of Opus Dei in that country. If you are unfamiliar with this court case, here in this article, I have linked a PDF with an English translation of the 2016 Tissier decision that you can read, because the interesting thing about this case was that initially it was settled in Opus Dei's favor in 2011, but then Catherine Tissier appealed, and in 2016 it was ruled in her favor. And it was kind of interesting how all of that played out. Catherine Tissier was a young French girl who came into contact with Opus Dei via one of its infamous catering schools, Daznan, at which point she was coerced into whistling at just 14 years of age. I know that this age is hotly contested. People will try to say that she was much older. I heard and read that she was 14 years of age. I mean, I suppose we have to say allegedly because, again, we weren't there and we don't know for sure. But the implication throughout the court case is that she was recruited at a very, very young age. Her life and potential were sacrificed on the altar of Opus Dei's agenda, and as an assistant numerary, became defined by long, exhausting 10 to 12-hour days, 7 days a week, for which she was not properly compensated. Coerced vulnerability, a glaring lack of true consent, and spiritual stagnation. It should be unsurprising to learn that Catherine was also exposed to suppressive and controlling techniques under the guise of psychiatric medicine. During her tenure, her mental health plummeted, and in an effort to do damage control, an Opus Dei affiliated doctor prescribed her increasingly substantial doses of antidepressants and tranquilizers. This is a matter of public record now. You can read about this in the court case. Her physical health declined so badly that upon being allowed to visit her family, they refused to let her out of their sight and back into Opus Dei's clutches. She was declared unfit for work and that her life was in immediate danger. She required intensive care and a carefully administered drug withdrawal regime in order to wean her off of the psychopharmaceuticals and back into stable physical and mental health. In 2011, along with 99 other domestic workers, ostensibly from the same catering school at which Catherine was enslaved / working, but I'm unsure, Tissier began a legal battle against Opus Dei in the French court system. Experts were called to testify throughout the duration of this court battle, which drug out over 16 years, made statements that were difficult to disregard. And here are a few of them. Quote, "The story that she tells is quite characteristic of the influence of certain sects on their members with early recruitment and commitment, total adhesion, a shared ideal, the implementation in place of a relational technique with one or more guardians, a technique of guilt and imposed secrecy which leads to sub-depression, even depression, and induces greater dependence on the sect on which therapeutic hope is formed. After several months of normal life and privileged relational support, the disappearance of the personality anomalies demonstrates that the depressive acts were generated by the abuse of authority which controlled conscience and kept her in a social precariousness which deprived her of all personal freedom. The vulnerability of Catherine Tissier is sufficiently demonstrated by the two expert reports which describe, at the time of the facts, a manifest psychological vulnerability with a sub-depressive or even depressive state inducing dependence on others. It does not matter that the first expert, who I think in this case was Dr. Discow, dates this vulnerability back to a period prior to her entry to the Daznan school. In fact, the testimonies relied on by the defendants to demonstrate that Catherine Tissier was not able, due to the fragility of her state of health, to work like the others and had to be taken care of, also contribute to the demonstration of apparent vulnerability. Finally, the medical certificate issued by Dr. Comant, who examined her during her return to the parental home in 2001, concluded the need for gradual drug withdrawal following a very heavy treatment with neuroleptics, which are sedatives, leaves no doubt about her vulnerability, which is quite apparent to all those who were in contact with her on a daily basis." End quote. In 2016, the institution Opus Dei, as well as several individuals representing the institution and working at the Daznan Catering School, were found guilty and convicted in Opus Dei v. Tissier of multiple criminal breaches of labor law. Opus Dei, the corporate work where the victims had been employed, as well as two of the corporate works employees, were made to pay several hundreds of euros in fines to a total of 73,000 euros. I have quite a bit of documentation about this court case, including an unofficial English translation of the French case and a Q&A document that breaks down the facts and findings. I hope that if this is the first time that you are reading or hearing about this case, that you will take some time to read through some of it. This is an important case because it establishes the precedent for holding not just Opus Dei's corporate works accountable, which it claims to have no interest in connections to, which is an important factor here, but also the organization as a whole. Opus Dei has always maintained that there is no institutionalized problem and that the negative experiences so many former members have alleged having are random outliers in an otherwise pristine and holy organization. I believe that is a lie that has served the organization well on a number of fronts, and I am not the only one who feels that way. Of course, that is just my opinion. Please do not come for me. All of this is just my opinion based on the information that I've been reading, and you can access this information as well for yourself. In 2023, the Apostolic Nunciature of the Holy See in Spain, which is essentially the equivalent of an embassy, received a document that was presented in Spanish, Latin, Italian, French, English, German, and Portuguese on paper stamped with the seal of the Spanish state and submitted by Antonio Moya Somolinos, a Spanish national and former member of Opus Dei. The document proved to be more than 20 pages long, and it bore the title International Ecclesiastical Institutional Complaint against Opus Dei for regulatory fraud against the Holy See and the members themselves. That is the whole title. The complaint had been submitted based upon one core fundamental reason with 7 supporting causes. The main reason for the complaint was, quote, Opus Dei's institutional regulatory fraud, which has been systematically hidden from the church hierarchy. The second of the 7 supporting causes was identified as, quote, fraud of the concept of spiritual family, suicides, depression, and psychiatric issues. It is stated in no uncertain terms that psychiatric medicine is utilized to, quote, break the will of those who dare to express any discrepancy regarding the institutional inconsistencies they have observed, end quote, and that, quote, these abuses are abundant and their effect translates into a generation of depression in members who previously enjoyed good health and psychological balance, end quote. These people were totally fine until they got involved with Opus Dei. This issue does not seem to be landlocked to one specific region either, as Moya Somolinos goes on to write that, quote, the high proportion of people under psychopharmacological treatment in Opus Dei is surprising, and that the only reason for this treatment is to annul the will of the dissenter, turning him into a broken person who, in many cases, has been returned to his family after having ruined his life. I think of Catherine Tissier requiring a drug withdrawal regime and careful care after her family wouldn't let her return because of the degree to which her health had plummeted. The complaint also alleges that this is common practice for doctors to leave blank signed scripts at Opus Dei centers, enabling the mass prescription of psychotropic drugs by people with no medical background or training to people who likely do not really need them. I have more to say on this subject, and the more that I think you need to see. But without bearing the lead, I will honestly say that, in my opinion, Opus Dei weaponizes mental health. It takes protocols and medications and weaponizes them to benefit the organizational good. The harm that this causes to people's lives is incalculable. So, and I have some videos linked in here as we were scrolling. You may have seen them. I've talked about this in the past. This is something that I've been aware of for a while now because I think it's sort of difficult to start wading into the archives of former member testimonies and not run into this element pretty quickly. It is consistent and very disturbing. So the next article that I want to read to you was published at the beginning of May 6th of this year, and it's about this prestigious Spanish clinic where they say they treat the people who come to us not only as patients, but above all as children of God. And we firmly believe that a doctor who also does research is a better doctor, which sounds great. And this is about the University of Navarre Clinic, which is one of the world's leaders in cancer treatment. And the American magazine Newsweek ranked it among the best hospitals in the world in various specialties. Although the clinic itself is not legally affiliated with the Catholic Church, it was established as the initiative of the founder of Opus Dei and is guided by Catholic principles. So let me translate that for you in case you didn't catch it. It's an Opus Dei medical facility. So I'm going to Control F, as I so often do, to skim through and find something quickly, and I'm going to look for psychiatric or psychology mentions in this article. So we have our first one here. They mention the faculties of education and psychology, which they have several faculties of note at this hospital, at this facility. And then they say that it's a clear example of interdisciplinary teamwork. They have all of these different disciplines in order to offer the latest treatments, the safest and most effective. We have 14 committees dedicated to individual tumor types in which assess each case. And look, I am not disputing that cancer research is very critical and necessary and important, becoming only more important as it continues to become a leading cause of death in people's lives. Clearly, we need that work to be done, and that's not something that I'm going to come sideways at whatsoever. But they also say that these teams bring together all specialists involved in the treatment of each tumor: medical and radiation oncologists, pathologists, radiologists, surgeons, hematologists, gynecologists, urologists, gastroenterologists, pulmonologists, pediatricians, nurses, and psychologists, of course. They said that we focus on adult and child psychiatry, which is truly valuable and important for many patients and their families in today's society. I won't dispute that. I think that is true. I think we have a mental health crisis around the world, and we don't have the resources sufficient to deal with it and to help people effectively. So that is very true. The issue for me comes into who is providing this care and the manner in which it is being provided. And unfortunately, the simple fact of the matter is, for me, at this point, when I find out that there is an Opus Dei element at play in some way, shape, or form with something like this, I instantly become suspicious. And as we go through, if I haven't already outlined why I feel that way, hopefully this will just continue to become more true. They say we often succeed in helping couples in their 40s who have tried everything without success. They're talking about neonatal and fertility care. They say we, again, that we work with all of these people. We approach infertility based on these detailed examinations. They work with all of these people, gynecologists, urologists, including, again, the psychologists. Psychologists are like very present at all times through these mentions. And again, I'm not saying that that is a bad thing. Please don't think that I am anti-mental health or anti-mental health care, anti-psychology, psychiatry. While I do not think that the disciplines are perfect and without flaw, I also believe that they do have merit and are important. My concern comes from who, in this case, is providing the care, and the fact that I don't really believe, in my opinion, that this organization has demonstrated that it is trustworthy or safe. So I think that's everything that this article mentions about psychology. You can read this down below if you want to get into more detail. This is the guy that they were interviewing. He's like the head of the whole thing, Joseba Campos, and you can, again, access this down below if you want to read it, but I just wanted to kind of show you how they are presenting this University of Navarre, where people are treated for a variety of conditions, and it's run by Opus Dei. Moving forward even further, now I want to present some firsthand testimonies from people who allege having been through this experience and this situation, and they have written about it on sites like Opus Libris and even Opus Dei Exposed over on Reddit. You can find these accounts for yourself and read them if you want to. You don't have to sit here and listen to me. You can access this information for yourself, and I urge you to. This article here titled The Fourth Floor by someone named Alberto Mancada, was published June 6th, 2004. So this is not a recent article, but I think, again, in the interest of laying the groundwork and establishing the precedent, it's relevant to bring up the fact that this is not a new issue that people have only just now started to talk about. It's been around for a little while. So Alberto wrote, in recent times, a growing number of mental illnesses have been observed among numerary members of Opus Dei, although along with a peculiar treatment for these illnesses on the fourth floor of the University Clinic of Navarre. Remember, the University Clinic of Navarre, so prestigious and so great, and they do so much. Well, they also apparently allegedly are doing this. Opus Dei members with problems are sent to this fourth floor. On the one hand, there are men and women suffering from psychological disorders caused by the contradictions of the numerary life. After a certain time, many develop depression, neuroses, and other conditions. Opus Dei leaders do not allow mental health professionals from outside the work to treat them and have organized their own team in Pamplona, led by Dr. Cervera and staffed exclusively by Opus Dei members to treat them. The second source of patients for the fourth floor are the undecided or critical members. Opus Dei leaders share that with Stalinist theories, the view that ideological deviation is a mental illness, and when some Opus Dei numeraries experience identity crises, they are advised or forced to spend time on the fourth floor. This reminds me a little bit of something that I spent a series of videos discussing here very recently, the Board for the Protection of Women, which was this Francoist era program in Spain that essentially locked up women and girls as young as 8 years old, women as old as 25, in these institutional facilities, basically, for their lack of submission to the Franco regime and the Franco lifestyle that was expected to be imposed upon every man, woman, and child at that point in time. Things as simply as wearing a miniskirt or smoking in public or going to a protest or something like that could wind up with you ending up in one of these places. People were sent here by their families. People were snatched out of their beds and drugged and woke up from having been drugged in these places, and the history and the true extent of the harm that is caused is still only just now kind of coming to the fore and becoming well known. And it's interesting to me how in this situation you have a similar thing where people who can't get on board, people who don't want to submit to whatever the way of life is, or people who are questioning the Opus Dei system, are sent or forced to spend time on this fourth floor in sort of an institutionalized hold, if you will. It smacks, in my opinion, of fascist rhetoric and behavior, frankly. According to some of the members treated, now outside of Opus Dei, the work of the medical team does not consist so much in helping them recover their health, in clarifying their identity, but above all in assisting that they remain in Opus Dei and accept their illness as divine proof. This is how former numerary Carmen Charo Perez de San Roman, a patient on the fourth floor, explains it. She wrote, quote, I suffered from depression due to the life I led in Opus Dei as a numerary, a denial of all self-esteem, a constant fostering of personal insecurity, an inconsistency between what one experiences and what one thinks. I was in this state for the last 7 years. The symptoms disappeared quickly when I left Opus Dei and started a new life. I want to denounce the annihilation of personality that takes place in the work, and also the scandalous lack of professionalism and ethics of the doctors who treated me, since they permanently allowed the idea to grow in my conscience that I suffer from a serious and chronic illness sent by God, which I had to accept with submission and gratitude. The directors of Opus Dei and the doctors always made me believe that God wanted me to be sick, and I gave him my absolute and unreserved surrender, since I had already given him my life. They never considered nor allowed me to think that I was suffering an existential crisis, an absolute suffocation of my personality, of my whole being, which I was preventing from believing and expressing itself. They never gave me any freedom. They opened doors and paths for me. They gave me guidelines for behavior to mature as a person and be freer. The only thing that was clear was that I had to persevere in Opus Dei against all odds, even at the cost of my life. For me, This is a cause of scandal, which even today, 15 years after my departure from Opus Dei, inwardly revolts me because I consider it a form of torture, which of course God cannot bless. I want to issue a quick apology if there are any like weird grammar things in this. Most of the content published on Opus Libris, and indeed Opus Libris as a site, is in Spanish. So I've translated to be able to read this using like a translator in my browser. It's not perfect and flawless, so I kind of have to like pick my way through and select how I'm going to phrase things. So I apologize for any stumbles there, but hopefully the message is coming through. And she says that even 15 years after her departure from Opus Dei, inwardly, it revolts her because she considers it a form of torture, which of course God cannot bless. Many of the patients on the fourth floor are kept in a heavily sedated state due to the abundance of tranquilizers and other drugs that weaken their willpower. This treatment is also practiced in the homes when their directors perceive signs of such situations. In this way, the Opus Dei doctors, complicit with the Opus Dei leadership, fail to fulfill their primary ethical duty to act in the individual best interests of their patients. Opus Dei officials maintain this internal use of the fourth floor in total discretion, and although outpatients from psychiatry attend it, the inpatients are isolated even from their own families, to whom the real situation is hidden with news such as they are resting, spending a period of rest due to professional burnout. How has Opus Dei reached this situation, creating a gulag for its own members? The evolution of the movement created by Escrivá de Balaguer allows for several interpretations. Escrivá designed a way of life for the numeraries modeled on that of religious orders: vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, rules for the control of activities by superiors, the obligation to reside in their own homes, etc. But the contradiction lies in the fact that, at the same time, it is asserted that the numeraries are ordinary Christians who have professions and practice them freely in the world, and who are responsible for their own opinions and decisions. In the early days, when most numeraries held academic professions, conflicts were rare. It was later, when numeraries, both men and women, were working in other professions, that conflicts began to arise. The most contentious issue began to be money. Numeraries must give all of their earnings to Opus Dei and receive an allowance from the house fund for their expenses. But if a professional, a lawyer, architect, doctor, a businessman, decides to invest in their profession or business, they need authorization from their superiors, something that becomes even more complicated if they want to take out bank loans. To this contradiction were added others, having to periodically abandon their secular work for apostolic activities, having to move house or city for the same reasons, until the normal performance of professional activities became practically impossible. These contradictions produce an identity crisis. Currently, most numeraries work in internal positions. They are priests, officials within the Opus Dei bureaucracy, teachers in its own educational centers, and so on. In reality, their employer is Opus Dei itself, meaning that the same authorities simultaneously control their religious observance and their work. This simplifies the contradictions at the cost of transforming the numerary into something else entirely: a religious person disguised as a civilian, and, with the intensification of the organization's sectarian nature, a robot controlled remotely. Meanwhile, the leadership has evolved. Today, people rise to power to positions of authority, primarily through loyalty to the organization, which prevents them from understanding and resolving the intellectual and existential contradictions experienced by so many members. Furthermore, those who hold internal positions have little civilian experience. Their lives have been spent within the organization, and their sole concern is maintaining personal and ideological control over the members. The current prelate, which at this point in time in 2004 was Javier Echevarria, joined Opus Dei at a very young age, has not studied at secular universities, has always lived in Rome, closely associated with those in positions of power, and has no professional experience whatsoever. Regarding ideology, although professional freedom is preached, in practice, reading, travel, and contacts are controlled. A sociological consequence of this is that there are hardly any numeraries who practice critical professions. There are doctors, engineers, military personnel, lawyers, and business people, but no humanists, poets, union leaders, or progressive politicians. Numeraries and supernumeraries are deeply conservative in their opinions and political affiliations. A former numerary was severely criticized in the confessional criminal because she did not vote for the People's Party at a certain time. The People's Party is like the conservative party in Spain, although now maybe it's kind of getting pushed out of the way by Vox, which is even like more alt-right. It is the supernumeraries, married and with a less close connection to the organization, who embody the doctrine of Opus Dei that its members should be active in the world. In fact, the supernumeraries drawn from more traditional Catholicism serve primarily to finance Opus Dei's activities through the 10% contribution of their income that they are required to make as part of their commitment. Focusing primarily on internal affairs undermines perseverance. Quote, "Where am I going to go at my age?" remarked a numerary in his 50s. "I haven't practiced my profession. I have no money. I'm well taken care of here. I have a comfortable house, domestic help. My needs are met. If I go out into the street and start over, it would be very difficult." Thus, there is so much forced perseverance, so much enduring decisions with which one disagrees, something that obviously leads to cynicism. Opus Dei, unlike other religious organizations, does not provide financial assistance to members who leave. What this whole situation reminds me of is something that I have been spending time going down the rabbit hole on in over here in the United States, the like trad wife phenomenon. I've been watching a lot of I believe her name is Jenny Gage. She's former Mormon trad wife. Her channel is called Life Take Two. Her energy is beautiful. If you've never listened to any of her videos before, I highly recommend her content because she is able to speak to like current events and issues and interpret particularly like the current conservative political landscape here in this country in a way that has been incredibly clarifying for me personally. But she's talked about her experience being a Mormon trad wife for like 25 years and the creek that she was up without a paddle whenever her marriage imploded and her husband left her and she was basically left on her own with absolutely no assistance or help from anyone, because when her marriage imploded, she also left the Mormon church. So she lost every single support that she had. And she was in her like 50s when this happened. And it caused her a ton of trauma and pain because she was not set up for independence, because she was encouraged to be completely dependent on another person and on a religious institution. It feels very similar in this case here. Another characteristic of the new Opus Dei also contributes to the creation of corrupt minds. The recruitment of numeraries, which was normally done at the university level, now happens earlier. It is very difficult to convince adults to become numeraries, just as it is equally difficult for the Catholic Church to find vocations to priestly celibacy. Therefore, recruitment is practiced among children, especially the children of supernumeraries who are educated in Opus Dei schools. And although canon law prohibits recruitment before the age of 18, Cardinal Hume of London faced serious conflicts when he prohibited this practice in his diocese, a legal loophole is used. The figure of the aspirant has been created, who can enter the work at 14 and a half and then become a numerary, although from the beginning they are subject to the same rules. Certainly, the progressive transformation of Opus Dei into a network of schools contributes to this. Escriva initially maintained that the work would never have its own educational centers, that its members would work in public schools, but over time, the need for survival and social changes have altered Opus Dei's strategy. Taking advantage of the Jesuits' abandonment of elite education, Opus Dei has opened hundreds of centers, especially in the Latin world, which cater to Catholic clienteles. The education maintains the elitist and conservative tone that these families desire. There are no coeducational schools, only single-sex ones. Opus Dei schools have good technical quality, but their teachers are obsessed with recruiting numeraries and use tutoring sessions for this purpose. An immoral alliance between teachers and confessors leads to the pressure on students that so many have already documented, especially in the testimonies that appear on this website, Opus Libris. The pressure exerted on candidates produces early Opus Dei vocations, which the leadership considers the most productive element of these schools. Not the education of young minds, recruitment and vocations to Opus Dei. But it also produces weak personalities, trapped in the ideological and traditional bubble that is Opus Dei for numeraries today. Most, leave as soon as they can begin to think for themselves, as soon as they feel their sexual urges more intensely. But others repress themselves, become fanatical, and one of the side effects of this approach by the leadership is the psychological distress suffered by so many boys and girls. I lost my place. There I am. Some of whom have attempted suicide. See the cited website. The auxiliary numeraries, those who clean the houses, deserve special mention. There are so many stories of like suicidal ideation and even suicides, tragically, within Opus Dei on Opus Libris. If you haven't taken a look at that, I highly recommend that you do. Logically, like all domestic workers, these associates come from poor countries, but in the long run, such discrimination leads to abandonment and also serious psychological damage. The fourth floor is, today, the latest expression of Opus Dei's progressive transformation into a sect, although the Vatican feels comfortable with this organization as a means to carry out the counter-reform of the new ways that emerged at the last council. Other similar organizations, such as the Legionaries of Christ or the Catechumenal Way, I'm probably mispronounced that, I'm sorry, enjoy, along with Opus Dei, the favor of this Pope, which at this point in time I believe was still John Paul II, to the detriment of the influence of other organizations that not long ago formed the organic fabric of the Catholic Church, the Jesuits, the Dominicans, or the Franciscans, who have evolved and adapted to new social realities. These fundamentalist and sectarian organizations are contributing to the fact that there are, in effect, two Catholic churches. The Vatican Church, traditional, friendly to closeness with civil powers, insisting on the old themes of sexuality, formality, and loyalty, in the Church of the Council, open to the world, symbolized by liberation theology, and dominant in the demographic space with the most future, such as Latin America. So, some things have begun to change since this article was written. Like it said, you can see here at the bottom, this was published June 8th, 2004, which was quite some time ago now. And we've had several popes since this was written, and several things have happened with Opus Dei. And the whole reason that, we're having this conversation right now was at least in part spurred by Gareth Gore going and talking to the current Pope, Pope Leo, who is taking an interest, whether or not he will turn that interest into action or how that's going to actually trickle down in terms of like meaningful reform is yet to be seen. But some things have begun to at least change there, and I want to acknowledge that. As far as what internal life is like for people within Opus Dei, we have no way of knowing. Us, the public, those who have never been on the inside and who would never be invited to be a part of something like Opus Dei, must rely on news reports, undercover investigations, testimonies, books, and research to try to piece together what exactly is happening and what exactly members are experiencing. And I do know that things have begun to change somewhat for Opus Dei in some parts of the world. Certain things are no longer done the way that they were before, and I think that is good. But unfortunately, stories and testimonies continue to come out from this decade, even people who have left very recently, talking about experiencing a state of affairs that unfortunately does not seem to reflect the change and reform that this organization would like everyone to believe has happened. So I have two more Opus Libris articles here. They tie into each other. This one isn't too long, so I'll go with this and the next, and then we'll conclude there because I know that this is getting long. But I want to present this information to you so you understand where my perspective is coming from and why I feel the way that I do. So this article here is a series of articles under the Depression for Me, Depression for You. I see a lot of depression around here title. I think there are like 6, maybe even 8 parts to this sort of series of articles. I'm not going to be reading all of those parts, just this part, and then I think I have the next part pulled up after this, because not all of it has to do specifically with the psychiatric medicine and like psychiatric hold issue, because it all ties into just the like broader system of control that seems to be implemented within Opus Dei, and that is all very important, and I've spoken about it at length as well. But for today, we're just focusing on the psychiatric medicine. Not to detract from anything else, but just because, again, I think it reveals something really significant about Opus Dei. So this was submitted by Sartoria Valentine. This is the username. And they say, hello, Sartoria Valentine here again. Greetings, and since the holidays are approaching, Merry Christmas to all Opus Libris readers. Let's see, this was published Friday, December 8th, 2023. We are back in this decade, friends, up from 2004. And this person's saying they see a lot of depression. So here I am with a new installment. This time it's about mental health in Opus Dei. Since it turned out to be so incredibly long, you know how I tend to ramble on about everything, I thought I'd send it in installments, otherwise it'll be a real bore. Today, the introduction. I sincerely appreciate Sir Arturia Valentine breaking this up into sections because it does make it easier to get through. So we have the introduction, and then we have part 1, and then through part 2 there are these other parts as well, which I did go through and skim and read, and they are interesting. You can find them, access them through this link in the source document if you want to read them for yourself. They write, I'd like to focus on the undeniable fact that Opus Dei is riddled with people suffering from depression, of all ages, which is indisputable, really. Denying such a thing is as pointless as trying to hide from the sun with a hair shirt. There are many objective factors that have led to this inevitable end, and many have spoken about it online. I'd like to contribute what I can think of, but first I'll talk about my own experience, because there's always some skeptic who tends to think we don't know what we're talking about. How foolish we are, really. How much stupidity and animosity roams the world. I remember that in the early 90s, I was in Madrid studying, and I ran into a numerary member right there on the street at 8:25 in the morning who had been assigned to me. So I called her over and we stopped to talk. This girl was thrilled to have met me, and it was a joy for both of us. It turned out that she lived in a center right there, a stone's throw from where I was studying. She was an administrator at another location, but we agreed that I would go to the center where she lived one afternoon so we could meet, catch up, and maybe I could study for a while in the study hall. No sooner said than done. The first day I could, we met there and talked about everything. One of the things she told me in a kind of old-fashioned gossipy way, like, our days were better, we had more energy, the new generations are more pathetic than ours. Now that was real coldness, not like it is now. Something like that. Neither of us had turned 30 yet, believe it or not. Well, what she was saying, as we were saying, was that about half of the numeraries at that center were taking psychotropic drugs because they couldn't cope with life. We're talking about a center in San Rafael. We're talking about university students. She herself had been prescribed some pills that had a little bit of amphetamine, so she could work well and not feel down since she was on a weight loss diet, which didn't alarm her in the slightest. I never heard anyone outside of Opus Dei say anything like that. I mean, say it as if it were normal. There will always be someone who takes slightly questionable shortcuts, but it's not normal. And I've met so many people who are dieting and working at the same time. In fact, it's quite common to diet and work simultaneously. I don't know if that may be like a mistranslation on the browser's part, if they mean diet and work out, like to be restricting your caloric intake and also working out like crazy could be what that means. I'm not 100% sure. Again, we're doing our best with what we have access to here. For those curious about how things ended up between me and my friend, something happened that I didn't understand at the time. Now I do, of course. Thanks, Opus Libris. So many episodes of my life are finally making sense. After a few days, she told me I couldn't go to her center anymore. It was the closest one to me, and it was where she lived, but no, that center wasn't right for me, not even to study, not even to pray. I had to go, I've been told you have to go, quote unquote, to another one, this one way out in the boonies. Although she didn't see it that way. She didn't understand the logic, and she thought it wasn't a good fit for me. She told me that too, but that's what I've been told. She wasn't happy. I was so incredibly naive that I even tried it one day. They were supposed to pick me up at such and such bus stop, so I took the bus and crossed the capital from south to north and got off where they told me. It was like the outskirts of a housing development, quite desolate. I didn't find anything, and nobody came looking for me. Besides, I had a migraine. Ugh. As a fellow sufferer of migraine headaches, there's literally nothing worse. It makes reality weird for the entire time that you're dealing with it. So I took the bus back, and that was the end of it. End of story. Nobody called me, and I wasn't given any explanation. I also couldn't talk to my friend again. You young people reading this have to understand that this was the pre-cell phone era, and if you can't call someone's house, let alone go there, that's it. Now I understand why, when her local council found out I was an ex, they were horrified. My friend knew I was an ex, though, through no fault of my own, an ex by force and quote unquote on good terms, but it didn't do her any good, and she had to submit to the superior's orders. Because I was an outcast, and a useless one at that. I was of no use to them. I wasn't good enough to be recruited, therefore I was good for nothing. Thank goodness Opus Dei is there to indoctrinate everyone, and that out of 100 souls, etc. Otherwise, I don't even want to think about it. They'd have stoned me. I hope you're well, dear friend, wherever you are, and that you no longer have to get high to be able to live a normal life. That's really, really sad. This is a recent publication, but it is about an experience in, like they said, a pre-cell phone era, and it's having an impact on them even still, something that they can recall very clearly. They wrote this in 2023. These experiences are like lingering with people after the fact. So next I'm going to read you the part 2 of this one. And it's a little bit longer, but the information that they lay out is really, really interesting. And this will be the last article that I read for today's video. As a heads up, they write, I'm inserting a message from future Sartoria Valentine, the one who's already finished writing this and is rereading it, completely blown away by what's coming next. Lazy tone. Don't worry, everything recounted here, while absolutely horrifying, is in the past and then some. I never suffered through it again. Don't worry, it's over. There's no more pain. And that is wonderful to hear, because if nothing else, I want to know that people have at least managed to carve a niche for themselves where they can live and find some peace and be unharassed. They say I'll resume my previous story. At the end of my second year at the Center of Studies, hereafter referred to as the Center, before the summer semester and the pre-assignment of centers, the director herself informed me that that was it, folks. That's all, folks. And not only that, no permanent position, no associate professor, no seniority, no co-authority, nothing at all, absolutely nothing, not now, and presumably never. My God, they must have thought I was in a bad way. Not long ago, a mental health professional, prompted by a casual comment I made to review the medication I was taking back then. What were you taking? What? For years? You mean years with 365 days each? What? At the height of it all, that is, for the good part of my first and second years of university, I was taking 12 pills a day. 12. I remember like it was yesterday. And I remember perfectly that on several occasions people asked me how many pills I was taking a day, and I counted them in my hand and said 12, to the astonishment of those I was talking to. I'll be told it's impossible that they were all anti-anxiety medications, and it's true. There were 2 that were to raise my blood pressure as part of the Cheer Up Woman, this is a nothing program. 2 others were to help me sleep. Well, according to this professional, the psychotropic drugs I was taking were merely, how do I pronounce this word? Anxiolytics, but also antipsychotics, or maybe they mean anti-anxieties, but also like antipsychotics. Specifically, they're usually used in patients with depression and psychotic disorders involving loss of contact with reality and hallucinations. Needless to say, I never had any of that. A very strong stuff, and let's be clear, for people who are a bit off their rocker. No wonder I've never seen anyone else taking them, never before or since. Now I understand everything. I don't know if the doctor at the time, an Opus Dei psychiatrist, obviously, made a mistake in the diagnosis, but he certainly over-medicated me. A lot. And for a long time. Years. I didn't need such treatment, but I've seen firsthand that this is often the Opus Dei practice, using a cannon to kill flies. Because if we can kill them with a cannon, to kill them good and dead, or rather to make them die as quickly as possible, why use a fly swatter? What do the side effects matter? What does it matter if they get all puffy, if they get tired from everything, if they don't even want to breathe, if they don't even think, look better, fewer problems? Yes, let me reread this because it was broken up. They said, what does it matter if they get all puffy, if they get tired from everything, if they don't even want to breathe, if they can't even think, look better, fewer problems, and as a bonus, 16 and 19 problems solved? What does it matter if their neurons get wrecked and their connections get damaged? What does it matter if people end up half-dazed? How convenient it is to just give them pills and that's it. Emotional anesthesia? Even better. That way they live like robots, like nice, good robots. I'm going to happily ignore the fact that taking heavy psychotropic drugs for years isn't free. Marginal note, using a cannon to kill flies without giving a damn that the side effects of the cannon fire are crushing you alive isn't just a practice in Opus Dei, it's what Opus Dei attributes to God himself as a practice. That is scary. I know it sounds harsh, but what was that saying again? Quote, that's how God does things. He hits the nail on the head once and misses the horseshoe 100 times. Something like that, right? Well, it's absurd. God has much better aim. And besides, it's believing that God is like you, that he thinks like you. It's attributing your modus operandi to God himself. God isn't that clumsy or that reckless. God isn't like you. He doesn't just swing a club wherever he pleases, but rather he's meticulous, very meticulous. End of margin note. Let's continue. I remembered something else. I wasn't given the famous Prozac, but it was circulating like hotcakes shortly after I left. And none of the side effects of Prozac, not very common but documented, is spontaneous orgasms and vaginal discharge, not to mention sudden vaginal bleeding for no apparent reason. This is quite frequent. How lovely and appropriate for a group of women in strict celibacy. This information came directly from a numerary member. I won't say more. A word to the wise. Now, let's continue. Side effects, man, they're gnarly. I've wondered why they waited until the end of my second year to fire me, because it was a real kickback. I'd renewed my contract in March, and then they hit me with this in June. And what's more, it was just a few days before the semester ended. Less than 3 days passed between the official notification and my departure, suitcase in hand, leaving me no time to react. They waited until the very last minute, basically. They should have let me go at the end of my first year or at the beginning of my second. The semester between first and second was glorious. For depression, not for me. But they didn't. I finished all of my second year. Having seen and read what happened to other people, I've wondered why. They could have fired me at the end of my first year. That already looked bad enough. I'm not wealthy, nor was my family. We're certainly not descended from El Cid. The only thing I can think of is that I was a smart aleck of 30 euros. So they must have thought it might be worth waiting to see if things improved. That's the only reason I can think of. For a long time, I thought the worst of it, that they wanted to wait until I was better before leaving because they treat people well and care about them. But then I realized that the following year, and the years after that, and until the end of my degree when I was still in treatment and in a bad way, they completely ignored me. Not a single call, not one. Much less dropping by to see me or meeting up for a quick coffee, the most complete oblivion. I think it's legitimate for me to have serious doubts. I say I used to be clever because I'm not anymore, or at least not nearly as clever. That's what happens when you've been popping pills nonstop for years. Psychotropic drugs take their toll, and if you take them liberally and carelessly, Macarena, during the years when your brain and neural connections are still developing, well, I don't even need to tell you. I'll give you a fact, like a minister. The brain finishes developing and maturing between the ages of 25 and 30. I'll leave it at that. In short, the all-you-can-eat treatment left me a bit dim, or at least less clever. Okay, I can hear you. There you go. Now you understand a lot of things. I know. Me too. The depression didn't start suddenly, nor did it end suddenly. These things are never sudden, nor are they easy. It's rare for depression to occur on its own, without support. I already had depressive symptoms, including physical symptoms, many of them before the course. For example, very intense and vivid nightmares. The two worst nightmares I've ever had in my entire life, nightmares that made me wake up crying and keep crying all day and the next day too, I had them while I was assigned to the course and during the year-long training. What a coincidence. Both were about carrying burdens that are far too disproportionate for someone my age. I can't say that after telling my supervisor I received a caring response, any affectionate attention, at least not for a few days. They listened attentively and with understanding, of course, but without giving it any importance. They looked for a solution, not support. It's such a common flaw in Opus Dei to do instead of listening and accompanying. It wasn't given any importance from an emotional or psychological point of view. They didn't even seem to care. So I was in free fall, but nobody saw it. Those who ran my school not only didn't see it, how could they have known, poor things, when I was just opening my soul wide to them every week? Impossible. So, as we were saying, not only did they not see it, but they tightened the screws on me as much as they could, It can't quite be true that you stop getting up every single day at 6:45 in the morning and head to the center for prayer and mass without skipping any rules until late at night, no matter what happens, and I don't see those grades going down. Plus, you work as much as you have to, and all of it pulling the cart by yourself. So when I entered the CE, I not only had a full-blown depression, I also started to have anorexia. And these are experiences that are not rare. I can't even count on two hands the number of testimonies I've heard from specifically former female members talking about how they developed an eating disorder while they were in this organization. And in this case, anorexia, they say, isn't that what happens to people who see themselves as fat for no reason? But what does that have to do with anything? Well, it has a lot to do with it. Let me explain. There are disorders that have a psychological origin, and they may not be what they seem from the outside. Let's take something very common among children and teenagers: self-harm. Those of you who are shocked by this, before you start telling me off, yes, it's a very common disorder among children and especially teenagers. At the school here, my kids in every classroom, between 2 and 3 students, regularly self-harm, usually by cutting themselves. We're talking about a reputable public school located in the center of a capital city, just ordinary people here. Thank you very much. Welcome to the real world. I'll give you a moment to process this, and while you're at it, reflect deeply on how difficult it is to be a parent these days. Don't resort to your own experience like, quote, when I was their age, things were this way and that, and we never did this or that. Maybe we did, whatever. Don't ever say those things to current parents. Never. Bad, very bad, awful. Apparently, if someone self-harms, it's because they hate themselves, or because their self-preservation instinct, which is one of the basic and normal instincts, is failing them. But no, the mechanism here is much more perverse. The mechanism has to do with moral suffering. In this case, I'm a child, teenager with few psychological resources because I'm just a kid. A lot and terrible things happen to me that make me suffer a lot. Shouting at home, my father hits my mother comes home drunk, my uncle abuses me, my brother does drugs, my father leaves my mother, has cancer, I spend all day alone, so much pressure stresses me out, and everyone pressures me, I have no friends, nobody understands me, I suffer and no one pays attention to me, that kind of thing. Very, very overwhelming and isolating feelings. And to me, being a kid, that suffering seems overwhelming. I don't know how to handle it. It's too much for me. It doesn't matter if for a balanced adult that suffering isn't so bad. It's enough that for me, a kid, it seems overwhelming, unbearable, and that it's too much for me. But do I know about physical suffering? I know what it's like and how it feels and what the process is like. So if I feel overwhelmed by suffering that I don't know how to manage, well, I go and cut myself. It hurts and it bleeds. I know that pain. I know how to handle it. And it's a pain that takes precedence. It rises above the other. It's more urgent. So basically, it's a pain that relieves me. I already feel better. I'm going to treat the cut. Needless to say, this entire process is completely unconscious. The kids don't formulate this reasoning in their heads. They do it intuitively. They only know that they feel relief when they cut themselves. Well, anorexia is similar. Some people are anorexic because they see themselves as fat and want to be thin, and they go overboard with it. But in other cases, it's used to try to control something. Just as self-harm attempts to control suffering, anorexia attempts to control the uncontrollable, so to speak. And what's uncontrollable for each person will be something different. I've known several anorexic people, and for each one, it was something else. I can only speak for myself. I, my 18-year-old self, couldn't control anything. It's true that there are things no one can control, like other people's illnesses, but that's relatively easy to accept. It's rational to accept that it's beyond my control, and I accept it. I can't decide about the illness any more than I can decide about what the weather will be like. That's understandable. But there are things, many things, that should be under my control. Decisions about my life, about my actions, about what I do every day. The big ones, what career to pursue, what to believe, how to see life. And the small ones, what to wear today, what time to get up. I'm tired, I'll watch TV. I ran out of face cream, I'll go shopping. And they aren't. Everything is controlled and organized by a way of life that has been imposed on me. Things that are being imposed on me under a false premise, that I signed a blank check at 14 and a half, that it covers everything, absolutely everything, and is irrevocable. Obviously, at that time, I didn't realize that that premise was false. I lost my place again. There I am. I believe it wholeheartedly. Not only am I constantly told what to do, but I'm also forced into a style I can't deviate from. This is something that really bothers me about Opus Dei, the imposition of a style. It's not enough to be the best Christian, incredibly pious and radiating holiness. No, you have to be one in a specific way because otherwise it's worthless. Anything that deviates from that style, big or small, is worthless. It drives me crazy. They even impose things on me that are repugnant to my reason. You can't keep this nice pen, you'll get attached to it. Seeing your family causes familiosis, which is like a fake diagnosis they came up with. Making fraternal corrections is the path to holiness, which that refers to this sort of like tattletale culture that is like encouraged inside Opus Dei, where all of the members basically like monitor and guard each other at all times. Sounds exhausting. Goddess, let's see, the skirt, that skirt shows your profile a little when you stick your leg out. It's an occasion of sin, and it doesn't end there. Furthermore, all this burden they place on you, everything, what you like and what you don't, what you handle well and what you hate, what you understand and what is incomprehensible, you have to want it all. Want it in the sense of will and also in the sense of love. You can't say or feel that it's being imposed on you. You have to say that you want it, and moreover, want it a lot in both senses. And again, I think that's like a confusion with the translation, because they say you have to want it and moreover want it. It repeats itself. Probably wanted and want it very, very much. And this is where anorexia comes in. Somewhere deep within my psyche, very, very deep down, in a completely unconscious way, my reptilian brain, or whatever you want to call it, said, I want to control something. Anything. I need to feel like I control something. It doesn't have to be something big, but I have to be the only one in control. Since this idiot, Sartoria Valentine, conscious as I am, doesn't even consider living without integrity or cheating a little, I have to find something impossible to control externally. Something that only I am in charge of and that no one can force me to do. What is exclusively under my control? Well, not eating. Mind you, not eating itself, eating isn't enough for me because eating is normal. And besides, when I eat, I have to eat what others decide, when others decide, where others decide, and how others decide. Not eating. That's what only I can control and no one else. So yes, anorexia is very much related as a disorder associated with the situation I was already experiencing, depression. Completely related. I hope I have explained myself well. And I think they have. This makes a lot of sense to me. I understand the need to feel like you have some sort of control over your life when you're in a situation in which you are completely powerless and helpless. And I think that that is a big part of the reason why you see people develop disorders like eating disorders and depression and anxiety and everything else. And I really have to wonder. I mentioned how I do believe we are dealing with like a mental health epidemic in like our society right now. I have to wonder the extent to which like disenfranchisement and like disempowerment and helplessness is playing into these like conditions that we see people developing, and like this sort of rapid onset and explosion in like depression and anxiety and in OCD and in things like eating disorders as well. Because maybe we're dealing with a population of people, I feel like I can say pretty confidently, actually, as someone living in America right now, society here, the sort of middle class that isn't supposed to exist anymore, is feeling incredibly disempowered and disenfranchised, helpless, out of control, and like nothing that we say or do matters or can move the needle any way, shape, or form. And that's a lie, by the way, for the record. Don't buy into that. If you are listening to this and you're agreeing with me and this is sounding familiar, I understand, I see it, I identify with it, and I actively fight against it because I don't believe that it is actually true. I don't believe that we are actually as helpless as we are being told that we are. I think that there are people who have a vested interest in convincing us that we are helpless and that we just need to go along with what they're trying to do already, instead of continuing to try to push back and resist. It's a lie. It's absolutely a lie. But I understand why that lie can be so convincing, especially if you are in a situation like this where you're essentially isolated and in like a bubble. You're not going to, the ability to step back and see the forest for the trees in like a meaningful way is going to be severely hampered, and I can completely understand why someone would resort to really extreme and harmful behaviors to be able to cope. And it really colors how I perceive Opus Dei's use of corporal mortification, the members being required to wear this spiked chain around their thigh called a cilice that will leave permanent marks, will bruise, especially if you're someone like me who like bruises just at the slightest little touch, will leave lasting damage. And this cloth rope whip they call the discipline that they like whip themselves with. These are practices that the members are told to implement in their daily life. And it really troubles me because I think that there are some inferences to be made here that are not pretty. Reading on here, we're almost at the end. The same doctor who examined my old prescription was shocked to learn I had anorexia. It really made her day. She was absolutely stunned because I don't have a typical history of anorexia, neither psychological nor personality related nor family related. But I did have anorexia. Oh yes, I did. I got down to like 15 kilos below my normal weight, and that's serious because I'm not tall. Almost a year without amenorrhea, that's quite something. Amenorrhea is it's when your period disappears, and in women, if your period up and disappears and you are not like perimenopausal or menopausal or pregnant, it's a sign that there can be something really, really vitally wrong with you that you need to address. And in this case, placing your body under extreme stress and extreme deprivation, you're not feeding yourself enough, that's going to make a lot of these like natural systems in our body shut down. And one of those is the menstrual cycle, because the menstrual cycle revolves not around menses, not around the monthly bleed, but around ovulation. Ovulation is the entire event that the menstrual cycle is built around. And ovulation is about releasing an egg for fertilization and to get pregnant. And the human body will not allow that to happen if you are in a situation where you wouldn't actually be able to support that life, i.e. you're not eating enough food, you're not getting enough like adequate rest, your mental health is a mess, maybe you're dealing with like chemical imbalances and things as well. That's not going to be like a positive situation for an egg or a zygote to try to like develop, and so your body will shut your menstrual cycle down, and that can be a sign that there is something really wrong. If that happens to you, and like I said, you're not pregnant, perimenopausal or menopausal, postmenopausal, you need to get that checked out, because that's a problem, and it can be a sign that there's something really, really wrong. When in my first year at school, I had to go back to my hometown at Christmas, they couldn't refuse for financial reasons. If you neglect the business, there's no money, no rock and roll, something in French that I'm not going to try to pronounce. Of course, now that I think about it, maybe it was to give me a break. Wait, no. Giving you a break means sending you on vacation to the beach, not sending you to a 12-hour work day and then back to the school to do your holy hour, and the next day getting up at 6:30 and starting all over again. Okay, never mind. Well, once I was back in my hometown, my mother was in tears when she saw me. She asked me what had happened to the 3 enormous boxes of all kinds of vitamin supplements that she'd sent me in October, which had cost her a fortune. Obviously, since they were a gift and also involved a decision about my own health, I had to leave them with the administration. Well, the decision was that I didn't need them. They didn't give them back, and I never saw them again, nor did I see anyone else take them. I think they must have thrown them away, and I had to tell my mother, "No, silly, I don't need them. What are you saying?" While my shoulder blades were showing through my winter clothes. Anyway, regarding the anorexia, it got worse before it got better, but don't worry. I started eating again in my second year. That's what happens when you take some really strong psychotropic drugs. They already have the opposite side effect. However, the depression lasted about 3 more years, always gradually decreasing. I remember the first year after I left with particular horror, because not only was I taking almost the same amount of medication, but I was also very lonely, and because of the abrupt and unexpected exit, I went through a kind of withdrawal syndrome from the numerical lifestyle that had been ingrained in me until then. I didn't enjoy the "I'm free" feeling afterward because of the way I left, the way they left me. Quite the opposite. You can recover from depression, friends, but only if you're allowed to. And it's fascinating because recovering from depression isn't just about curing an illness. It's about escaping a prison and getting to know someone very interesting: yourself. This is especially true and arduous when all you've known is depression, perhaps because your childhood was rather sad and then you entered clinical depression in your teens. The task of finding yourself and the world around you is long and arduous. But it is very much worth it, and I want to work towards promoting societies that uplift and assist people in trying to figure out who they are, finding a good path forward, living a good life. I think that these are all wonderful goals to have. And even to take it a step further, I will fully acknowledge that Opus Dei's entire, concept and reason for existing, how they promote this idea of sanctifying yourself through your everyday work and your life and treating the work that is in front of you as your vocation, that certainly resonates. It resonates with me, and I know that it resonates with many, many people. What I think is important to remember is that, especially with this organization, they are not the creators of this idea, of this concept of treating your work as your vocation. This is something that has existed throughout Roman Catholic Church history. Numerous saints had entire theological perspectives built around this idea of treating their work as their holy vocation. Saint Therese of Lisieux had the Little Way. There are so many ways to incorporate that kind of mentality holistically into your life in a way that is positive and beneficial. And I will not detract from that in any way, shape, or form, because I do think that there is value there. And I also don't believe that Opus Dei is the right organization to be guiding people down this path. I feel very strongly, in my opinion, that what is being reported from former members, the stories that are being told, the accounts that I have been reading, the facts that have been reported over and over again in the Financial Times, in the Daily Mail, and books like Gareth Gore's Opus and Maria del Carmen Tapia's Inside Opus Dei, that is hinting at a problem. I don't think that this organization is responsible. That's my opinion. And I am concerned for people who are on the inside if what is being reported here is to be believed. And I certainly find it compelling and more than a little upsetting. And so in the next couple of videos, I'm going to be following a similar format to what I did in this video here, where we'll be reading a variety of news articles and personal testimonies from former members talking about not only just APM, but also this fourth floor phenomenon, La Cuarta Planta, where members are apparently seemingly incarcerated and held against their will. This is something that I want to continue to draw attention to in the weeks and days ahead, because I think, as I said, it reveals something incredibly telling about the reality of life inside this organization. All protestations from Opus Dei to the side, we have to look at what is actually happening and read through the subtext, because I think things are pretty clear. At least in my opinion, it seems pretty clear, and I sincerely hope that substantial reform and justice rolls out quickly for everyone involved in this situation. I think it is incredibly, critically important and necessary. So thank you for giving me your attention to this matter today. I hope that you learned something. Let me know your thoughts down below. What is your opinion on this whole abuse of psychiatric medicine? What do you think of this rumored La Cuarta Planta and what that reveals about Opus Dei? How do you feel about the fact that an organization that is being accused of these kinds of things is so omnipresent in so much of our society and culture? And again, if you are someone who is in Opus Dei currently and you are watching this for some reason, if you manage to get through this, I would just want to know how you are squaring your participation in this organization with the experiences and testimonies that so many people are sharing and speaking about. Do you just not care? It's not relevant to you? Human suffering doesn't move you in any way, shape, or form? I would be interested to know. So that's where I'm going to be leaving this for today. Like I said, links for everything that I read are in the source document down below, along with links to connect with me on social media, learn more about my work, support my endeavors financially if you want to. Of course, that is completely optional and not something that I expect or require whatsoever. But it is there. This work does take a lot of time, and I will have a new video for you very, very soon. Also want to mention, just because of the subject matter here, I have a variety of mental health resources linked in the description down below. They're from different places around the world. I did my best to collect a wide range. I need to go through and like update it a little bit, because I know there have been some like new programs and things that have been initiated, but that is there. If you or someone that you know is in need of mental health support, please reach out. Life is incredibly difficult. This kind of shit does not make it any easier, but we do not have to go at it totally alone or unequipped. There are people who want to help us. So if you need help, please reach out. That being said, I'll let you go for now. I'll see you again for another video soon. And in the meantime, just remember, nolite te bastardes carborundorum. Don't let the bastards drag you down.